Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard Podcast. On this episode, going to be bringing back the fast break segment that I did about a month or so ago. A lot happened in the league last week, and it was some things that I didn't feel like deserved or warranted a full 15, 20-minute video or so. So I'm just going to be touching on a couple topics here briefly and moving right along. If you do like the video, please give us a like and subscribe. We're dropping content weekly, so stick around for that. Also, if there's some areas that you agree with, disagree with, or just a topic you'd like us to discuss in the future, throw it in the comments section, and we'd love to discuss it with you. I guess kicking things off on kind of a somber note, last night, as of the time of recording this, Kevin Durant sprained his MCL. He's going to be out the next 4 to 6 weeks. Really scary moment for obviously Brooklyn Nets fans, and then the NBA as a whole. At least me as an NBA fan, when we come playoff time, I want to see the best teams at full strength really going at it. And if that had been like a torn ACL, we probably wouldn't have seen him. We almost assuredly wouldn't have seen him the rest of this season. But doesn't need surgery, so that's great news. It's just going to be some rehab. But we really shouldn't be too surprised that he ended up getting injured. Currently fifth in the league as of recording this in minutes per game. And it's not like these are easy minutes. It's not like he's just, wandering down the court and going to stand in the corner and getting, cupcake defensive matchups because of the lack of consistent interior play and kind of depth at that center spot. He's kind of had to be the de facto defensive anchor for them. Also, because of no Kyrie for most of the season. I know they just got him back, but at least at the beginning of the year, they didn't have him. And then also this really limited version of James Harden, an inconsistent version of James Harden he's really had to carry the load offensively. It's just not sustainable for a guy that's in the back half of his career and 2 years ago missed an entire season due to an Achilles tear. So it's just it shouldn't come as a huge surprise that a guy at this stage like Kevin Durant would eventually get injured under the circumstances where he's really carrying the team on both ends and then playing just some obscene amounts of minutes. If we're looking at this through an optimistic lens, though, for Nets fans, if you had to deal with the Kevin Durant injury at some point in the year, this is about the best time that could have happened. We're still, still got about a month to go before the trade deadline, so they can really evaluate the roster and see what they need to bring in. And, for their play, they're getting Kyrie back at least for away games. I've heard some grumblings that he may come back for home games too at some point. I didn't really want to dive into the whole legality of that. And I'm just kind of sick of the COVID stuff just in general. I feel like most people probably are. So I didn't really look into that too much, but great if he can. If not, you at least have him for away games. Also, Harden, he's going to have to take the reins here, especially if Kyrie's only playing away games. He's going to really have to, take the reins of this team. And he's just not looked the same all year. And literally in a certain case when it comes to his body shape. Now with him having to carry the load, he's going to have to play himself back into shape, and maybe he'll kind of get back to form, what we saw in Houston all those years. I've talked about it a couple of times on this podcast. I think there are some real concerns with him that he's just never going to be back to that level of player. Just, he doesn't take care of his body, and if he doesn't get back into shape, it's going to be a struggle for him. But also, the more concerning piece of that is he put a ton of miles on in Houston, having to carry that team offensively year in and year out, those high usage rates. I mean, you would see every year they'd get to the playoffs, he'd just be out of steam because during the regular season, he was just carrying them night in and night out. So if those miles have finally caught up to him, like I knew they would at some point, that's not good news. But just in general, this team needs to learn how to play without relying on Kevin Durant so heavily. He can't be, the guy who carries them on both ends, night in and night out during the regular season. He really needs to save that for the playoffs. So this is going to give them, a month, 2 months where they're going to have to learn to live without him. And for their position in the standings, it's pretty low risk for them. Looking at the standings, the only teams that are really a threat to pass them or like as far as they could fall, I could really only see them going to the 6th seed. So they're still avoiding the play-in. If the wheels completely fall off of this thing, I don't expect they will. I think Harden and Kyrie could kind of keep them afloat enough. But if it's a complete disaster without him, I don't think they're in any threat of falling into a play-in situation. And honestly, kind of on a joking note, but also serious, if Kyrie's only able to play away games, come playoff time, I think they would probably rather have him than a home game. So if they drop in the standings, they're going to have more away games, and that means more Kyrie. So that could be a blessing in disguise if they end up dropping in the standings. So I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be fine for this next month. It might look a little ugly at times, but I don't think it's going to jeopardize the long-term goals of this team. And I think kind of getting away from the really heavy Kevin Durant reliance is honestly in their best interest. Moving on, we had Bol Bol. For those who don't know, he's a bench warmer on Denver, but a really interesting bench warmer, probably the most interesting bench warmer in the league. He's a 7'3" guy or so, something like that, but he plays like a guard. I mean, he handles the ball like a guard, and the shot's a little bit ugly, but it goes in a whole hell of a lot. So, I mean, he's really just a guard trapped in a 7'3" guy's body. Not the worst thing to have. So he got traded to Detroit, but the trade ended up falling through. He didn't pass his physical. A little bit alarming for on his side of things. From what I remember, I didn't end up looking this up, but I remember him being a pretty highly regarded high school prospect heading into college. And then he had kind of an injury-riddled season with Oregon, ends up being a second-round pick, which I think if you had looked at him in high school, that was far lower than we would have ever imagined him going for the NBA draft. Really has struggled to find time on the court. Denver has been like a really competitive team during Bol Bol's tenure there. So it's tough to find playing time for a developmental project, especially when you have Nikola Jokic, my money, the best center in the league currently. You just don't want to take any minutes away from him, and the fit between the two might be a little weird. It's just, I don't know. It's tough for him to find playing time. For the Bol Bol piece of this, I have no idea what to make of this guy. I feel like every time I see him play, on the rare occasion I get to see him play, I'm really impressed at like what he could be. And it seems like he's playing pretty well. It's hard to, imagine why he wouldn't be getting playing time somewhere. But I think it's probably, I talked about this a little bit with Sabonis and Miles Turner. This is obviously a more severe degree of that. I think there's not a lot of trade buzz around Sabonis because he's a harder piece to make work. Like, you have to find a really specific role for him. He doesn't fall into like the cookie cutter defined roles that we already have. Bol Bol is this to a T. He's not a traditional center, so it's kind of hard to figure out what to do with him. If I were coaching a team, and this is probably why I'm here and not coaching a team, I would have no idea what to do with this guy from a role standpoint or from a developmental perspective. For Denver, they would have only gotten a second round pick, I believe, back in this trade, so not a huge haul. But honestly, with the way that they draft, they seem to always nail their draft picks. So it would have been nice to get a future pick down the road, especially for, a player that I would say they probably have no plans to bring back. He's on the last year of his contract, and then no plans to really play him this season. So to get anything back for something like that would have been nice for them. For the Detroit piece, they're going nowhere this year. So it would have been nice to get like an enticing prospect. And for them, second round pick, a really low cost to get a guy who, at least in high school, was very highly regarded. It's sort of like the Michael Porter Jr. Denver situation. He was, consensus number one player in America heading into his first year at Mizzou, but then he had such serious injury concerns that he really plummeted in the draft, and that allowed Denver to take him. And, not a high investment on their end at the time, but with huge upside potential. Obviously not looking super great on that right now, having just extended him, and he's out for indefinitely with some more back issues. For Detroit, it would have been a very similar situation. A second round pick is a low cost to pay for a guy who could be really good, Obviously, the injury concerns, really, really big issue there, and that's why Denver's would be keen on giving him up. I think he could have gotten minutes in Detroit. Isaiah Stewart's a fine starter, and with all the COVID stuff going on, you don't always have all your guys, be it Stewart or Kelly Olynyk. So he could have found time. The two or so games I've watched Luka Garza, I think it's Luka Garza, Garza play. It's clear he's not an NBA caliber player. He's a very skilled center, but just athletically, he can't compete on an NBA court. Garza, when he was out there, it reminded me of the scene in 8 Crazy Nights where the little referee character is like, Adam Sandler and him are reffing a basketball game, and he's trying to keep up with the kids as they're going up and down the court, and he's just always like 10 seconds behind everyone. Garza doesn't run really funny like that character did. I didn't mean that to come across as mean as it probably sounded. But when the fast break is happening and Garza's trying to keep up with everyone, it's honestly hilarious. So to bring in like a guy to kind of play those minutes when you either have some COVID issues or just want to give guys a rest, try something new, that would have been really nice for them. But alas, it didn't happen. So we won't have the Bol Bol awakening this season. Probably maybe they can find a different team who's willing to take him on despite the issues with the physical. I don't know. But moving on to a trade that did actually happen, we had the Knicks and the Hawks reach an agreement that would send Cam Reddish and Solomon Hill and a second round pick from the Hawks to the Knicks for Kevin Knox and a very heavily protected first round pick. That pick is top 18 protected for 2022, top 16 protected for 23, and top 14 protected for 24, 25. After that, it becomes 2 second round picks. For the Atlanta side of this, I'm going to go over this first because it's kind of the least interesting, I guess. Is this really the best deal that they could have gotten for Cam Reddish? That seems ludicrous to me. Really concerning if it is for teams like Detroit, maybe want to get off of Jeremy Grant. If this is the type of haul you can expect for, Cam Reddish, not an all-star caliber player by any means, but I feel like a lot of people think pretty highly of him and what he could be. I would have expected a lot more for this. A late first round pick or 2 second round picks. Obviously, they get Kevin Knox. Maybe Atlanta feels some type of way about him. I can't imagine that being the case. I can't imagine he's even going to get any playing time there. Playing time is really hard to come by in Atlanta. I can't imagine Knox getting out there ahead of Bogdanovich, Herter, or Hunter. Or if you run him at the 4, some combination of Gallinari or John Collins. I just can't see him getting playing time. And that's kind of the reason that, they ended up dealing Cam Reddish, at least in part, is because he had requested a trade because he wasn't happy with his role there. We'll kind of get into the Atlanta piece of it next week when we do some mid-season stuff, because Reddish is not the only guy who's unhappy with his role there. So the only thing I can think of for this trade is maybe they needed to open up a roster spot. They get rid of 2 players and deal them for 1. But if that was the case, I feel like you could have cut Solomon Hill, waived him or bought him out or whatever, and it wouldn't have cost you too much financially. He's on a pretty low cost deal and it's the last year of that deal. So I don't know. The only other thing I can think of is maybe there's a deal coming down the line that Atlanta wants to capitalize on, where the team that they're dealing with did not want Cam Reddish and would have preferred a first round pick. That's the only other thing. I know they've been rumored for Ben Simmons, but I honestly can't see a John Collins as a centerpiece of a Ben Simmons deal. I just can't see Daryl Morey going for that. The fit with Embiid is okay, but I wouldn't consider it great. And there are just better packages out there for Simmons, I feel like, or at least I would hope for Philly's sake. If this does end up being the only move they make of the deadline, or like this isn't related to another move that they're making in the future before the deadline, it's kind of a yikes deal for me. I mean, they really gave up Reddish for very little. And it's not like Reddish was on the last year of his deal, unhappy or not, he's still under contract for next season. So they could have done something next year and gotten at least the same package, I would have to imagine. So I wouldn't feel too great if I'm an Atlanta fan if this doesn't end up amounting to anything, else down the line. For the Knicks, this is honestly, it just seems like a heist. I mean, they gave up very little. And for Reddish, he's shown that he's a good defender with potential to be a great defender. For the scoring piece, he's shown flashes that he can go out and get a bucket on his own as like a smooth operator type scorer. And they really didn't, like I said, they really didn't give much up to make this happen. For them, if they do have plans to keep him for the future, they can extend him this summer on what I would have to imagine is a pretty affordable deal for them. Or if they're not happy with the way it goes the rest of the season, they still have a year left on him, so they can kind of, make him prove it if they feel like they want to do that. The Knicks are kind of sorely in need of guys who can get buckets on their own, and Reddish has shown some flashes that he could do that. Also, another young player, for a team that has kind of not gotten off to, the start they would have hoped and is not having the season that they would have hoped. Getting a young guy they can develop in here is never going to be a bad thing. Also, Reddish fit wise with Thibodeau. I mean, this is the type of guy that Thibodeau just drools over. So, could be really exciting there. I think he'll get some real playing time and really get a chance to show what he can do. Kind of on a funnier note, it does look like the Knicks are really gearing up to try and make a play for Zion at some point, kind of reuniting his Duke teammates. That could be something Zion's interested in kind of revisiting down the line. I think that's probably not going to happen. I think it was probably more coincidence than anything, maybe kind of a nice bonus that they could, have a better pitch for Zion down the line. But I think they probably just wanted to grab a player like Reddish on a pretty low cost trade. Obviously I've said a lot of good things about Reddish, but obviously he's not going to really move the needle for what they can do this year. And there are some real concerns for him. He's been really inefficient in Atlanta, when he's been given opportunities to kind of cook on his own. And at Duke, Reddish really struggled compared to what we thought he would be coming out of high school alongside RJ Barrett, who's reunited with here. So I'd be a little bit concerned on that front. But, again, for what they gave up, this is a really low risk thing for them. So I think they should feel really good about this deal. Maybe some Knicks fans, I certainly haven't seen any on Twitter who would be concerned about giving up Kevin Knox, but he wasn't getting any run anyway. So they clearly weren't interested in giving him playing time, and he was on the last year of his deal. So I can't imagine there were any plans to re-sign him. So they gave up a late first round pick and a guy who wasn't going to be on the team next year anyway, who they were going to let walk. They got a real NBA player, a young guy who they can develop. So I think Knicks fans should be really happy about this, but I think we should hold off on planning the parade. Moving on to the Lakers, this is kind of I don't know. LeBron is just carrying them. And a lot of games, it just hasn't amounted to much. I think they're on a 3-game losing streak. Point guard on offense and center on defense. I don't know how he's going to hold up for the playoffs. And from a 37-year-old in his 19th season, this isn't a long-term plan of success. Having a player in the twilight stages of his career, I have to imagine, unless he pulls a Tom Brady and plays for another 10 years. This just isn't a long-term plan for success. I can't imagine him holding up for the playoffs, playing point guard on offense and center on defense. The Lakers, I heard some rumblings that way earlier in the year, they had kind of kicked the tires on trading Russell Westbrook. Really no shock there that didn't end up happening. I can't imagine there was a huge trade market or any interest in acquiring Russell Westbrook for most teams. For the teams that have the cap room to kind of absorb his contract, it's really tough to kind of bring him in if you're looking to develop young guys. He's really not a good player to do that. And the Rockets obviously have a deal out there that we could see the John Wall, Russell Westbrook swap again, but I can't imagine the Rockets really are interested in that because, they're paying Wall to sit at home, who's on a very similar contract, so that he doesn't stunt the development of their young guys. Russell Westbrook is way worse for young guys than John Wall would be, just because of his ball dominance, and he would kind of feel especially the need to be the man in Houston. Maybe the Knicks in the past would have been interested in this. This has Knicks move written all over it, acquiring an aging star player who's clearly the best years are behind him. But it seems like they've really wisened up. Obviously, Ben Simmons is out there, but Embiid, from anything I've seen, doesn't seem to really get along with Russ at all. And also, I can't imagine Daryl Morey doing that again. The Thunder, I think Russell Westbrook would help them win some games, and they have, kind of the room, money wise to bring in him and provide relief for the Lakers, but they don't want to win any games. They don't want him to, help them win. So won't be seeing a curtain call there. I just don't think there's a deal out there for him. Now it feels like the Lakers are just kind of throwing out names that they're interested in, and with no regards for how they're going to get a deal done. Earlier in the year we saw, the Lakers are interested in acquiring Ben Simmons. Well, I'm sorry, there's just not a deal for Ben Simmons for that. Like, as I said, the Sixers are definitely not taking Russell Westbrook back as the big piece of the Ben Simmons trade. Now we're interested in acquiring Miles Turner. That'd be a great fit alongside LeBron. Just not really a deal there to be made. And then this week they're like, now we're interested in Gary Trent Jr. from Toronto. Well, there's just not, unless you can swindle them into, taking Taylor Horton Tucker back in that deal, there's just no way to get it done. It doesn't really matter who they're interested in. They don't have any trade pieces. Taylor Horton Tucker, Kendrick Nunn are the only players that are on contracts that are really dealable outside of like Anthony Davis, but I don't think they're going to deal him. So they're really limited on what they can do. And because of the huge price they gave up to get Davis, like they just don't have a lot of picks anymore to try and convince somebody to take on something, some pick based package for trades. I just don't know what they're going to do. I'm interested in buying a mansion. I've expressed interest in buying a mansion, but I can't afford it. So it's kind of like, what is the point of them throwing out these names? Their honest to God best bet here is to just pray to the buyout gods that somebody wants to go to LA and it's somebody that can really help move the needle for them. I think they should really consider bringing in DeMarcus Cousins again. To give them a real option at center. He gave the Bucks some good minutes, and while he's not going to completely, transform them into a title contender overnight or a team that we really feel good about as a title contender, I think it's an upgrade on the corpse of DeAndre Jordan. Also, they could try and make a play for Jeremy Grant. I think, if you could somehow convince Detroit that Taylor Horton Tucker is a interesting prospect. Every time I've seen him play, he's just abominable. But if they could somehow make that work with Kendrick Nunn and Taylor Horton Tucker, maybe they could get something done for that. I don't know. With the Cam Reddish trade, maybe the trade market for some of these guys isn't as expensive as maybe we thought. But if I'm Detroit, like, I'm fine with keeping Jeremy Grant rather than taking a flyer on Taylor Horton Tucker, who just signed an extension. So I don't know. I think the Lakers are just stuck. I think their best bet is like maybe cutting some guys who aren't really panning out and just hitting the free agent market and just throwing poop at the wall and seeing what sticks.